As you know, F1 is welcoming 11th team for the first time in 10 years, as it expands to 22 cars, with Cadillac joining the grid for the first time, and we're all very eager to see how they get on. But before their debut in Melbourne, how did all of the other 10 teams get on in their first seasons? Going in chronological order, let's start with F1's most successful team. That, of course, is Ferrari, and they started all the way back when Formula 1 started in 1950. Albeit Ferrari's debut didn't actually happen until the second round of the season at Monaco. They missed the first race at Silverstone. But nevertheless, Ferrari has been there from the very start, and they made quite an impression on their debut as they finished on the podium with Alberto Ascari, and he was one of 4 drivers to drive for the team that season. Ascari's teammates were Dorino Serafini, Raymond Sommer and Luigi Villoresi, and between all of them they managed to score 17 points for the team over the course of the season. But back then the Constructors' Championship didn't exist. That didn't come until 1958. But the main highlights for that season were not only the second place at Monaco, but also the second place at their home race at Monza, shared between Ascari and Serafini. And over the course of the season, the highest placed Ferrari driver in the championship was Ascari. He finished in 5th place in the standings. And of course, he would go on to become Ferrari's first ever world champion just 2 years later, and would back that up with a second championship the year after in 1953. So the good times were not too far away for F1's most successful team. It would be another 16 years until the next team on this list would make their debut, and that team is McLaren, of course founded by the great Bruce McLaren. He decided to form his own team, and it would be a bit of a difficult start for McLaren in Formula 1 because that first season was pretty tricky. They didn't really make much of an impression, and in the end McLaren only managed to score 1 points finish in his own car, finishing in 5th place at Watkins Glen. But still, it was a start, and it was only going to build from there. And because of those 2 points that he scored, they did finish 9th in the championship, and McLaren himself finished 16th in the Drivers' Championship. And to be fair, they didn't have to wait too long for success. They won their first race at Spa in 1968, just 2 years later, and then of course their first World Championship came in 1974 with Emerson Fittipaldi. We now move on to Williams, who made their Formula 1 debut back in 1977, founded of course by the great Sir Frank Williams and Patrick Head, who formed the team together, and it would of course become one of the most successful Formula 1 teams of all time. But back in 1977 it was a very difficult start, like it was for McLaren. That first season they only had one driver, Patrick Neve, and it proved to be a pointless season. They did not score a single point, with Neve's 7th place at Monza being the best result they managed all year long. But once again, like for Ferrari, like for McLaren, success was not too far away, and in 1979 they took their first win at Silverstone, and then a year later Williams became world champions with Alan Jones. And in periods in the 80s and of course the 1990s in particular, they would dominate Formula 1. We now fast forward to 28 years later in 2005. That's right, we're in the final year of the V10 engines, and this season we saw the arrival of Red Bull, who of course took over the Jaguar team at the end of 2004. And it proved to be a very successful first season, considering that they were a new team. Of course, a lot of the team that they had came over from Jaguar and stayed with the team as they became Red Bull. And actually, I would say that first year was a success for them. They scored 36 points in all, finishing 7th in the Constructors' Championship, just behind BAR. And don't forget that BAR finished 2nd behind Ferrari the year before in 2004. Their drivers for that year were of course the experienced David Coulthard, who got Red Bull's best results, finishing 4th twice on their debut in Australia and then again at the Nürburgring. And then the second seat was shared between Christian Klein and Vitantonio Liuzzi. Liuzzi only made 4 appearances that season, Klein did the rest, but both of them managed to add to Red Bull's total over the course of the season. Liuzzi finished in the points on his first outing for the team at Imola, and then Klein scored in the first 2 races of the season, and of course had a great 5th place in the final race in China. Red Bull of course have become one of the most successful teams of the modern era. They won their first race in 2009 and then went on to become world champions for the first time a year later in 2010. We're now into the 2010s, and it's Mercedes that is next on our list. They debuted of course in 2010, having taken over the Brawn team that won the championships with Jenson Button in 2009. But it proved to be a very mediocre return to Formula 1 for Mercedes. Of course, they raced in Formula 1 in the 50s in 1954 and 1955, winning both world championships in those 2 seasons with the great Juan Manuel Fangio. But after the Le Mans disaster in 1955, they decided to quit motorsport. But they decided to return, and they brought with them Michael Schumacher, who teamed up with a young Nico Rosberg. And together they helped Mercedes finish 4th in the World Championship, which of course was a disappointment, having won, as I said, the championship with Brawn the year before. And surprisingly, it turned out that it would be Rosberg that would be Mercedes' lead driver. He scored the best results for the team over the course of the season and finished ahead of Michael in the World Championship. Rosberg would go on to score all of Mercedes' podiums that year in Malaysia, in China, and then their final one at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix. And of course, Nico would also go on to score Mercedes' first win in 2012 in China, and then also play a big part as Mercedes became F1's dominant force at the beginning of the V6 hybrid era in 2014. We now move on to Haas, who of course made their first appearance back in 2016, having completely started from scratch. Gene Haas set up his team, having obviously run a team over in America in NASCAR, and decided he wanted to bring the Haas brand into Formula One. And boy, did they make an impression on their Grand Prix debut in Australia. They took advantage of a red flag during the middle of the race that involved one of their drivers, Esteban Gutierrez and Fernando Alonso, and managed to score a 6th place result with the other car driven by Romain Grosjean. So Haas was off and running, and believe it or not, they managed to better that result at the very next race in Bahrain. Grosjean again starred as he finished an incredible 5th place. That was as good as it would get for Haas during their debut season, but nevertheless they did manage a few more points finishes and finished a very respectable 8th in the World Championship, scoring 29 points in total. Grosjean of course would stay with the team up until the end of 2020. He was a real key mainstay during those early years, and his experience really helped shape the team and of course helped Haas as they themselves also built experience. In fact, Grosjean still holds the equal best result that Haas has managed during their time in Formula One. He finished 4th at the Austrian Grand Prix in 2018, and that has only since been equalled by Ollie Behrman's 4th place finish in Mexico last year. I think it's fair to say that in the 10 years they've been in Formula One, Haas has really established itself now as a proper Grand Prix team. The only thing that's missing now is a podium and of course a win. Next up is Alpine, who debuted back in 2021. Now Alpine of course are part of the Renault division, and to help promote Alpine as a brand, Renault decided to rename the team from Renault at the end of 2020 to Alpine for that 2021 season. And it was a season in which they brought back Fernando Alonso, who of course had driven for the team in 2 previous stints when it was Renault, and of course had won his 2 World Championships with them in 2005 and 2006, and he would be partnered by Esteban Ocon. And it was Ocon who would go on to score Alpine's best result of the season, which, would you believe it, would be a victory at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Even though Alonso was not able to match that kind of result, he did get on the podium for the first time in 7 years when he finished 3rd in Qatar. Overall they scored 155 points and finished 5th in the World Championship. They went on to better that in 2022, finishing in 4th, but it's been a difficult few years since. Alpine turned out not to be the only team that made their debut in 2021. Aston Martin also made their first appearance in Formula One in 2021. Well, I say that, of course, Aston Martin actually did race in Formula One at the end of the 1950s, but of course this is a different entry, and this is a team that took over the former Force India, then Racing Point team, so the two are naturally not related. The drivers for that season were 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll, of course the son of Lawrence Stroll, who owns the team. There was a lot of high hopes that Aston would be able to kick on from Racing Point's fantastic 2020 season, in which they won a race with Sergio Perez, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. They only scored 77 points and finished a lowly 7th in the World Championship. The high point was, of course, Vettel's podium in Baku when he finished in 2nd place. He did, of course, finish on the podium in Hungary, finishing in 2nd again, but he was disqualified for a fuel irregularity. Since then, the team has gone on to score many more podiums, particularly with Fernando Alonso in 2023, but instead of making progress, it has more regressed. So there is a lot of high hopes that now with Adrian Newey on board, that they're going to finally take that step to win a race during the new rules era in 2026. Is Racing Bulls, who made their Formula One debut back in 2024 under a different name. Technically they were called Visa Cash App RB and changed their name to Racing Bulls for 2025, but technically it is the same name and same team, so I'm going to count 2024 as their first season in Formula One. They of course have gone through a different number of guises, initially as Toro Rosso when Red Bull took over the old Minardi team, then it rebranded to AlphaTauri in 2020 and now has become RB and Racing Bulls since then. And just like Red Bull in 2005, they would not have just 2 drivers that would complete the season, because while Yuki Tsunoda would race at every Grand Prix that season, Daniel Ricciardo would be replaced by Liam Lawson for the final 6 races. But still, all of them contributed to the team's points total. They've managed to score 46 points in all and finished 8th in the World Championship. And Tsunoda would score a handful of 7th places, which would turn out to be the team's best results over the season. Even though they haven't managed to add to the 2 wins they had previously as Toro Rosso, with Sebastian Vettel at Monza in 2008, and then again with Pierre Gasly under the AlphaTauri name in 2020. They did manage to make progress in 2025 and scored a fantastic podium with Isaac Hadjar at Zandvoort, and I'm sure we'll be hoping for more results like that this season. The final team on our list is of course Audi, who will be making their debut this season. They of course are a new entry. Even though they are taking over the former Sauber team, Audi has never raced in Formula 1 before. They of course are famed for racing in other racing series and other racing disciplines. Audi's particularly made their name in rallying, where of course they were very successful with the Audi Quattro in the 70s and the 80s. They've also been very successful in sports cars, particularly at Le Mans and in WEC, where of course they won many championships and won the Le Mans 24 hours on a handful of occasions. And also in Formula E, they of course were world champions back in 2017 with Lucas di Grassi. They'll be very much hoping that their transition from Sauber to Audi will be a very smooth one, and that they can hit the ground running as quickly as possible. Their drivers of course will be Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, and they'll be hoping that they will be able to score similar results as they did in Sauber's final year last year. Who knows, maybe they'll even be able to match the podium that they got at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. I guess anything is possible, but just like Cadillac, we're very eager to see how Audi get on in their first full season in Formula 1. Well guys, there you have it. That is it for today's video. It's going to be very interesting to see how Cadillac get on in their first full season in Formula 1. Let me know in the comment section where you think they are going to finish in the championship. If you are new around here, don't forget to like the video and please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.